Oh, I thought I had the bio pulled up. Just 1 second. All right. So Adam is originally from Northeastern Ohio and completed his undergraduate degree in wildlife biology at Ohio University. From there, he went straight into a master's program in biology at Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU, which is in Richmond, Virginia. His project focused on mammal population surveys in several national parks across Virginia. And after completing that master's program, he continued to teach biology at VCU until taking a graduate PhD position in botany at Southern Illinois University. His PhD work and NOAA Graduate Research Fellowship brought him back to the Gulf Coast, where he studied coastal plant communities and the impact of invasive species, something everybody should be familiar with. He received his PhD in 2015 and became an assistant professor at the University of South Alabama in 2017. He currently teaches introductory biology for majors and an upper-level course focused on plant-animal interactions. His current research objectives remain centered on animal biology, plant community dynamics, invasive species, and more recently, and the topic today, the majestic gopher tortoise. You can go ahead and start, Adam.
All right, can you guys hear me? Good, okay, cool. Thanks, Carrie. That was a great introduction. And thanks for the invitation. Glad to be able to talk to you guys today about the gopher tortoise and some of the other stuff that I'm working on research-wise at University of South Alabama and all around this area is where I've been conducting field work. Primarily, though, my focus has been on Splinter Hill Bog. This is actually a painting done by a guy who had visited Splinter Hill Bog and was so inspired that he painted this. I just think it's gorgeous. And so you see, does anyone know what species of pitcher plant this is, by the way? You guys know pitcher plants, right? The carnivorous plants. So this is actually called, this is the Sarracenia leucophylla. This is called the white top pitcher plant. There's another, this is a Liatris baccata, another really cool plant here in the background. But yes, so my background's in botany, so as you can tell, I get sidetracked with plants when I'm supposed to be talking about gopher tortoises, so I apologize for that. Yes, spiked blazing star, exactly. So here we go. Let me give you guys let me give you a little bit of a quiz to start out with. So there's confusion a lot of times in terms of, like, a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between a turtle and a tortoise? And yeah, I see Haley responded turtle, right? So this one is definitely a turtle. So there are adaptations for aquatic lifestyle here with the flippers. So that's a pretty easy one. How about this one? Anyone? This one's actually this is a box turtle, right? So this is a box turtle from Missouri, and you might think this is a tortoise, right, based on its appearance, but it's somewhat, the distinction here can be somewhat arbitrary, especially in the case with these box turtles, because in fact their lifestyle is mostly that of a tortoise, right? They're terrestrial. Their feet and their appendages are more adapted for a terrestrial lifestyle. How about this one? Does anyone know what this one is?
A red-bellied slider.
There you go. All right. Yes, the Alabama red-bellied slider. So this one clearly got the this is a turtle, aquatic lifestyle with the kind of, again, appendages adapted more for that kind of living. Let's try one more. How about this one?
Tortoise.
This is actually a box turtle. So it's kind of a trick. Sorry, guys. So this is a Missouri. The one I showed you earlier was a kind of a Missouri. I think it's called a three-toed box turtle from Missouri, whereas these are more the type of box turtles that we'd see here, eastern box turtles that we'd see here locally. But you can get an idea as to some of the variation that exists. So all of these are turtles. Trick. So let's look at some tortoises, right? Let's look at the Gopher tortoise, which is more of to the point for today. And so this is so they're one of 4 or 5 species of tortoises in North America, depending on who you talk to. I think they've started to separate the Sonoran Desert tortoise versus the what's the other desert out there? Someone help me. Anyway, there's two desert tortoises in the Southwest, but this is one of 5 different species, and they all dig burrows to some degree. The Gopher tortoise, in particular, is really adept at digging burrows, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. But it's a terrestrial vegetarian reptile, right? So that's really limited to box turtles and to tortoises, of which there are very few. And so this burrow building lifestyle comes in very important in terms of the broader ecology of the ecosystem. All right, isn't he adorable? And there's one in the burrow. So they'll dig these burrows. We'll talk more about kind of the structure, the physical structure of the burrows here in a second. But clearly they're engineering the ecosystem, right? They're significantly modifying the habitat to some degree. And so there's a distinctive burrow shape, and then you'll see all of the excavated soil material that is sort of distributed around the opening right in front of that burrow entrance. And so we call that actually the apron. And this is oftentimes where the tortoises will actually lay their eggs. So you want to be careful if you do find a tortoise burrow not to, kind of trample all over the apron. But you can kind of see what kind of a nice little disturbance that it creates in these communities here. All right, so here's another quiz question for you. When we look at burrows, we can kind of gauge the status, this sort of activity level. So we either call them active, inactive, or abandoned. So any guesses as to, let's say, what the middle one is? Is it active, inactive, or abandoned? There are no tricks in this one.
Is it inactive?
Yeah, we'd actually call this one here in the middle inactive. You can see that within the last year or so, it's definitely, there's been a tortoise going in and out of there, but you see a lot of debris sort of laying around the mouth of the burrow. You might see spider webs or sticks, debris in the entrance of the burrow. But otherwise, the burrow is still in pretty good shape. So we would probably call this one inactive, whereas this one over here would be more in the abandoned. In fact, you can hardly see the burrow opening here, really full of debris. Sometimes it's even collapsed if it's really old. But these burrows can last for many years in the environment, in these habitats. And so this one over here would be an active burrow, right? And you can even see little tortoise footprints here. So clearly an active burrow in this case. So when we're assessing, we're doing surveys, these 3 main categories is what we'll look for when we're doing these census surveys. Yeah, and so I have this down here. So one tortoise, these tortoises may live 60, 70 years, and so one tortoise may have at a time, a tortoise may have multiple active burrows that it's traveling back and forth between. And over their lifespan, they may excavate over 100 burrows. So you start to think about the magnitude of their impact in these habitats can be can be quite large, especially when you get substantial population sizes, bigger colonies. This is a really cool article I wanted to show you guys. So they use this Kinlaw and Grasmook. They used the ground penetrating radar, GPR for short. And so they're actually visualizing, I'm not sure how deep this goes down to this sort of base reflectance, but you're looking probably at least 5 meters down from the surface. So here you've got the surface of the soil all the way down. And so what you're seeing, they're actually able to visualize the actual active tortoise burrow. And really cool, you can see little mouse burrows. So mice will come in here and they'll actually dig little side burrows. So mice are reliant on these burrows for habitat. You got plant roots up here. These ground penetrating radar are really cool. Any idea what these are? You guys know what these blue things are?
Water, maybe?
No. The color is misleading. It's not water. These are actually relic burrows, right? So these would be bits and pieces of old abandoned burrows where maybe majorities of the burrows have collapsed. Okay, and so it gives you an idea as to the extensive impact that these tortoises can have in these habitats. So just literally in areas where tortoises are abundant, like the ground is just littered with old burrows, right? And so it's a really important disturbance in mixing up the soil, disturbing plant communities so that rare species can establish and dominant species don't take over everything. So it's an important disturbance in these habitats. Okay, I thought that was cool. I wanted to share that with you guys. So identification, if you're walking around, first of all, you want to be in the right habitat, right? Splinter Hill Bog, there's upland areas. So, you guys know, you go up and there's kind of these little sand hills and you get pine species in the canopy and a lot of diversity in the understory, but the soil is really important. It's typically a lot of sand, but not sand, or else these burrows would collapse. And so, being in the right habitat is a good way to to try and find a tortoise burrow, obviously. But then there's a lot of holes in the ground, right? And there's a lot of animals out there that are digging holes. But tortoise burrows typically have this very distinctive shape, right? It's almost like a half circle or a half elliptical shape that really is just taking the shape of their carapace, right, of their shell. And so you'll see other hole, like any ideas what made this hole? One on the bottom. So this is not a tortoise burrow. Any guesses?
Armadillo.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times you'll get armadillos digging around, or sometimes they'll take over an abandoned tortoise burrow and they'll actually kind of change the shape of the old tortoise burrow. And so those are a little bit more difficult to figure out. But yeah, there's a lot of armadillos out there that are using old tortoise burrows and also making their own burrows that can be misidentified as tortoise burrows. Okay. So I wanted to mention that kind of been alluding to this, is that with the mice that dig side tunnels off of a main tortoise burrow. So you're seeing a tortoise burrow here. I thought this was a really cool drawing, and it's basically just demonstrating how peaceful and loving the gopher tortoise is, how well it does at sharing, right? It is like the only reptile that will not try to bite you, right? You can handle these guys. They will try to pee on you, but they will not try to bite you. And so there are a lot of species that depend on these structures, right? These engineers, these nice little burrow habitats that they make. So there are very specific species that only sort of associate in areas that have these tortoise burrows. Probably the most well known of those is the indigo snake. The indigo snake, which is a threatened species. But there are others. There are other species of amphibians, of reptiles, of mammals, even insects um, that use these burrows as part of their survival, right? So in that regard, we'd argue that these are keystone species, right? They're species on which other species are largely dependent for their own survival, right? Okay. So unfortunately, in the last century, we've had an 80% roughly reduction in gopher tortoise population numbers. And this, of course, is sad. Most of this is due to habitat destruction, habitat loss, because again, these tortoises are a little bit finicky with the type of habitat, but we do have a lot of that habitat type around here. These sort of more upland, kind of drier pine forests, and tortoise just love those. Unfortunately, people love to live in those areas too, right? So if we look at the, this is from a paper in 2017, but this is showing you the distribution of the gopher tortoise species, right? And so the greatest declines, unfortunately, have actually been over here in the western part of the range. So this is actually the Mobile / Tombigbee River. So the Mobile and Tombigbee rivers sort of come together, and is really sort of the delineation between more of the core population versus sort of this western peripheral population. And what's happening is these rivers are really providing a geographic barrier that has kind of isolated this part of the gopher tortoise species distribution. And unfortunately, this is where the greatest numbers, greatest declines have actually been in the western part of this range. And in fact, this led to the decision in 1987 under the Endangered Species Act to actually list the gopher tortoise, but only in this part of the range, right? So in Alabama, Mobile County is actually, the gopher tortoise is actually federally protected. It's considered threatened, but in Baldwin County, it's not, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So it's protected by state laws in Baldwin County, but not federal laws. Okay. Right, red circle. Okay. Another part of that paper I thought was cool. I just wanted to mention, they did, some future work in our lab is looking at genetic differentiation and genetic differences. And so they did a really large scale assessment of genetic variability, and they basically found 5 distinct genetic populations. And again, this sort of reemphasizes the point that westernmost part of the distribution really has a unique, is a unique portion of that distribution. But again, this sort of geographic barrier here, kind of separating this peripheral group of tortoise populations. Okay. So, as I mentioned, those in Baldwin County are not currently under federal protection, but it is being discussed. There's a push to, and a lot of these tortoise populations, these remnant populations are on private land, and so it's really hard to get a grasp as to how many tortoises are actually left in Baldwin County. Are there really viable populations in Baldwin County? And if that's not the case, then it should probably be listed for federal protection, but they're still in the process of gathering that information and sort of prioritizing this discussion for the for the gopher tortoises. Last I've heard, it's definitely moved up to the top of the list, and they're trying to sort of assimilate all information to try and make this decision whether or not to federally list the gopher tortoise as threatened in Baldwin County. All right, so I just wanted to kind of highlight, this kind of the last part of this is just highlighting a few of our research questions that me and my students kind of tackle in our lab. And my grad student Robin Lloyd has worked on the first 3 of these, and he's going to hopefully be defending his thesis soon. Right, he's writing it up as we speak. But so first, how has persistence of tortoises been, since this federal listing back in 1987? And I was lucky enough to talk with an emeritus professor in our department, and he actually had Dr. David Nelson had old survey data from 1991 and 1992 from Mobile and Baldwin counties that was never really published. I think he may have produced some technical reports, but all this unpublished data. And so we went, we revisited those sites. And all told, there were 165 sites that we found in his records from 1991. And we went back to all of those. Well, most of them. We were able to get back to all 100. We were able to get back to 146 out of the 165 sites that were surveyed for gopher tortoise burrows back in 1991. So we did this in 2018. And so all the red triangles here that you see are those initial 165 sites that were actually resurveyed. So there should be 146 red triangles there. I haven't actually counted them, but I'll take Robin's word for it on this one. And what we found, so revisiting those sites and doing surveys of tortoise burrows, this is Mobile County here. So this is in 1991. There were over 300 tortoise burrows that we found across these 146 revisited sites. And we see a slight drop off. So really, that's pretty cool that we don't see much of a drop off in terms of total number of burrows between 1991 and 2018. It's pretty remarkable, actually. And then we see the same kind of pattern for Baldwin, but notice that there's just a lot less tortoise burrows in Baldwin County. Now, does this have to do with maybe there's just less suitable habitat for them there? We're not really sure, but clearly there are substantially fewer burrows, at least at the 146 sites that we visited throughout Baldwin and Mobile County. This one is kind of a little bit more disturbing. So in terms of persistence, like the number of sites, so the percentage of sites with burrow presence. So of those 146 sites, what percent of them actually still had burrows? So, or actually had burrows, right? So back in 91, almost, say 70% of those sites that he visited actually had burrows on them. So what he did is he actually just looked for suitable habitat. He drove around his car, looked for suitable habitat, and when he found it, he surveyed the sites. And so 70% of those sites back in 91 had burrows, had tortoise burrows on the site. But we see a pretty substantial drop between 91 and our recent survey in 2018. And so, almost a 30% decline. Now, we don't know really when that decline occurred, but it definitely occurred after they federally listed it, right? So are they still declining? We don't know. Obviously, we need to do more surveys, but certainly a pretty substantial drop in the number of sites that have active tortoise burrows compared to 25 years ago. In Baldwin County, less of a drop, maybe because there were already very few sites that had burrows anyways, but a good substantial decline there in Baldwin County as well. So that's that's interesting. So I mean, going back to this, we have a lot of burrows, but a substantial decline in the number of sites that have burrows. So it's possible that the tortoises are really just, they're being sort of funneled into a fewer number of sites, right? So we're losing sites, we're losing habitat, and those tortoises, by law, have to be relocated, and so it's possible that we're losing sites, but they're just getting like reaggregated in higher numbers at other sites. So again, we need to do further surveys to figure out if this decline is still ongoing. So just real quick, impacts of tortoise herbivory. So we wanted to know, like, this is a really important herbivore that's hanging out in these forests, and so what are the impacts? Sorry, I meant to animate this, although I guess it's pretty obvious. Like, I was going to ask you guys, like, can you see where the tortoise was foraging? So there's a burrow right back here out of the picture, and this is clearly a foraging patch for that tortoise. And if you look real closely, which you can't, but if you're out there and you were to bend down and look real closely, you could see the plants where they've sort of been munched on by the tortoise. But this is, you can kind of get an idea as the impact of this is probably just one or two tortoises that are out here sort of grazing this site down. And so what this kind of disturbance does then again is it limits the dominance of those common plants and gives opportunities for rare plants to establish. And so we wanted to investigate that further. And so we actually established little plots, little vegetation plots in and around these tortoise burrows. And so just after, I think this was only after 8 months, you could see a clear difference, right? And you might say, well, this looks much better, right? Well, in fact, what's happening in this plot is a decrease in diversity, right? So you're getting one or two species that are starting to dominate, whereas over here, it doesn't look as good, but actually in terms of the number of species, these plots end up being better. And so that's kind of cool. And we have seen that already over very short-term sort of exclosure plot experiment, but this is a classic way to experiment with the impacts of herbivory, right? Figure out what the herbivore is and exclude it, or try to exclude just that herbivore. And I think we're doing a good job of that here with this fencing. Deer can reach in here and browse if they want. And other little rodents and stuff are not being excluded. So hopefully we're primarily just excluding gopher tortoises, and so the effect is really just due to that tortoise. Okay, so finally we look at behavioral patterns. So this is cool. So we did a little spying on the tortoises. We have motion activated camera traps that we set out in the field to monitor the behaviors, foraging patterns, courtship behaviors like what you see here. So let's see if this video will work. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's you have a male here on the left, and he's doing this little head bob. The female's not buying it, right? But this is, some kind of communication. Hey, I'd like to mate with you. In fact, I'm going to try. Not going to happen, right? So that's pretty fun. And he's still head bobbing though, right? That's cool. Let's look at another one. So there's a courtship video for you. Just feel like we're invading their privacy. Here's one, a commensal species, so species that associate with these burrows. You can see it here. It's really quick. So this is a possum, and I think the burrow is right here. So it's hard to tell in this video, but this possum is probably using this burrow. And there he goes. That one's not as exciting, right? Gone. So we have several undergraduate students that have looked through thousands of videos, and a lot of times, like, this is all you see. Yep, there he goes, and then he's gone. But there you go, documentation of possums associating with these burrows. Let me see. Here's another one. What do we got here? So look at the bottom left-hand corner. There he comes. So his burrow is like right under the camera in this case. And so this is cool because we can actually see the tortoise. Actually, you can actually hear the tortoise. If I'll shut up for a second. Like right there. He's foraging, right? So you can see he's clearly foraging on those plants. And if I could stop talking, you would actually be able to hear it, him kind of chomp, chomp, chomp. Isn't Splinter Hill Bog beautiful? I love it. I love it up there. Okay, let's see. Here we go. The armadillo. There he goes. So armadillos will use these too. I think that might be it. Like anything else? Oh yeah, rodents. We gotta represent with some rodents. Cute little mouse, creepy glowing eyes. Okay, so that's, we've kind of been still in the midst of sort of quantifying all of these different behaviors that we're seeing from the tortoises, like time of day, how often they do it, what's the duration, and all this good stuff to sort of quantify the behavioral ecology of these tortoises so that we get to know more about them. Okay. Future work on population genetics, population viability. I also have an undergraduate doing work with fire as well. So I think some of you may have even burned Splinter Hill Bog and maybe even saw our plots up there. But I have an undergrad who's going to kind of follow up on that on the second bullet point here and look at how fire is also impacting. So combination of sort of chronic low levels of herbivory by tortoises plus those big fire disturbances to see how that's influencing those plant communities out there. Anyway, so that's my take on the wonderful world of tortoises, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
We have some questions from people. I want to do some of the questions that people repeated, because that means multiple people want to get those, right? Let's see. Haley and Braylon both have a question about like the picture you showed with all the animals in the tortoise burrow. So if Haley, you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I'll ask it. Excuse me if you hear my dishwasher in the background. So my question was, I know other animals use the burrows and mice do little side tunnels out on the side, but do like the indigo snake or other animals like live in the burrow, like the main part with the tortoise, or do they primarily wait till it's abandoned?
I think both. I think the indigo snake will utilize these burrows at various stages of, or various status levels. I don't know a lot specifically about the indigo snake. The indigo snake may be more choosy and only focusing on abandoned burrows to prevent, this periodic disturbance by the tortoise. But I think a lot of these species are probably using it, throughout, whether it's active, inactive, or abandoned.
All right,
That's
thank you.
Good question. That's a good question. Yeah, thanks, Haley.
Awesome. It's kind of strange that they live together like that, but yeah.
I know. That's why I love this picture. It's just like one big happy multi-species family. The tortoise is like the dad.
It honestly looks like a picture out of an old children's book.
Yeah. Actually,
the Franklin.
The website I found this on, it had a lot of like children's sort of cartoon-like things. Yeah, it reminds me of like Alice in Wonderland, or like yeah, something like that. Noah's Ark, I guess.
Right. And then Austin had a question on like how on like the five different genetic varieties of the turtle. Austin.
I was asking how, since there's 5 distinct areas with tortoises, with the gopher tortoise, do you think there's any lack of genetic transfer across that region that could be affecting the species negatively?
Yeah, so that's the question. You're talking about this one here, the Galliard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is something they talk about in this paper. I can send you a link to this paper. It's really cool. And they talk about these core populations, potentially being less isolated than this population over here. I think largely just due to the Mobile Tombigbee River system. It's really a large riparian zone that tortoises just can't cross that, and so you think there's more sort of gene flow going on over here, presumably, than this really initially isolated population.
So not within our own lifetimes, eventually we could see that population in Mississippi becoming its own species.
Yeah, certainly there's potential for that, right? You see restricted gene flow for long enough on a population, it's gonna differentiate at some point.
Awesome. Then we had questions about the plants they eat. So I guess a bunch of people asked this question or a similar question, but I guess Ashley C. I don't know if Ashley C. can speak right now, but you want to ask your question?
Ashley.
She might.
No.
She's been having tech issues. Yeah, a bunch of people just asked like what kind of plants do they eat and like how does like their like the type of plants they eat affect the biodiversity of an area?
Yeah, so that they do focus on some species. The gopher apple is I should have had a picture of a gopher apple. But gopher apple is they mostly are they're browsing on plants that are low, so they're either consuming seedlings of bigger plants or they're eating smaller herbaceous plants. But really the point with herbivory is that you get this it's sort of a low level disturbance, sort of an intermediate disturbance that ends up being good for the community because you keep sort of the dominant species in check and allow for some of the more rare species to remain competitive and to establish in those areas. So that's kind of how you keep diversity higher in those areas with herbivory. So arguing that fire isn't the only thing that helps to maintain the diversity, because these are famously very diverse habitats, these longleaf pine forests, and fire has gotten a lot of attention in that regard, but herbivory, and specifically tortoise herbivory, could be very important for maintaining that in between fires, which can sometimes be pretty infrequent.
Yep. And yeah, I guess that's why you list them as a keystone species, right?
Yeah, that, and with the burrows and the habitat they provide with those burrows. Without the burrows, the other species that use those burrows might have less chance of survival.
Okay, yeah, and then Braylon had a question on like other keystone species. If you want to ask that, Braylon.
Yeah, so I know in certain ecosystems there's usually only like one keystone species. However, there are times where there's maybe two keystone species. I was wondering if there's another keystone species that will impact the gopher tortoise, in a more positive way, like how it, does for the other animals in the environment and ecosystem.
Us, humans. Other than that,
Okay.
I can't really think of one in this particular system. But certainly, you know, we're having the biggest influence on the gopher tortoise by you know, developing critical habitat into golf courses and residential developments. In fact, any of you familiar with Spanish Fort area? There's a
Yes.
my grad student found a really great kind of, well, sad but good example of before and after situation where back in the early 90s during those surveys, trying to think where it is exactly in Spanish Fort. There's a golf course there now, basically, but we saw back in those early 90s surveys before that golf course was built, there were gopher tortoise sites there, and it's prime gopher tortoise habitat, but now it's a golf course. You know, it's really sad because so yeah, that's, you know, we are their biggest enemies in terms of you know, keystone species.
Building off of that, are there like species that the gopher tortoise depends on? I know other species depend on it, but is there
Right.
something that it depends on?
You know, just the plant. You know, it's a vegetarian, so it's depending upon those plants regenerating, and you know, fire to help promote that. So again, you know, the degree to which we can help maintain that natural habitat, you know, I guess I would argue that we are the best example of a species that they might be depending upon, but only because we've already intervened in the past, right?
Right. And then I guess going off of that, Boris had a question about future plans for the gopher tortoise.
Yeah, so it's still up in the air in terms of Baldwin County. You know, they'll remain to be federally listed in Mobile County, but whether or not they get listed in Baldwin County remains to be seen. And it's the last I heard, it was still very unclear. You know, it just depends on how much data they can collect, how much information they can get. If they can find big populations of tortoises in Baldwin County, then they'll be less likely to list it. But based on what we were seeing, and we've shared our data with the people involved in this process, and based on what we've seen, you know, compared to Mobile County, anyways, it looks pretty bleak for tortoise populations in Baldwin County at this point, and seems like a good idea to federally list it at this time, but we'll see.
So I don't know if I missed this, but what does federally listing the species do?
So it puts limitations in place in terms of developing those lands that have gopher tortoise colonies on them. So like, for example, with federal listing, if you see a burrow on that land, then there are serious limitations as far as development of that land. However, in Baldwin County currently, with just state protection, the burrow doesn't even guarantee their safety. You actually have to see a tortoise. It's kind of weird because it's almost like, you know, seeing a house and just pretending that no one lives there, right? So just because the house is there doesn't mean there's a tortoise there. I mean, most of the time we would say that, yeah, if there's a house there, there's a good probability that their tortoises are living there. But in the case of Alabama state protection, just seeing a burrow is not good enough. And even if you do find tortoises, I think in Baldwin County they can still develop, but they have to mitigate. So they have to move the tortoises to some kind of conservation bank where those tortoises can live in suitable habitat. So there are restrictions with state laws in Alabama, but they're very lax. Whereas with federal protection, it's much more difficult to do anything on the land that has even tortoise burrows.
Nice. So on that note of like what people are doing, what should So Cody had a question about what he should do with his parents' property. You want to ask that, Cody?
Yeah, I'll ask. In the past, we've had gopher tortoise. We've had a gopher tortoise burrow with an actual turtle sighting on our parents' property. Is there anything that property owners can do as far as reporting sightings, or is it just kind of like what you said earlier?
Yeah, so with the Alabama, so the woman who's in charge of a lot of the tortoise work here in Alabama, Erica Shelton Nix, and talking with her, she's interested in hearing from private property owners who have substantial gopher tortoise colonies. So if it's someone who just maybe has one or two tortoises on their property, I don't know that they're too interested in that. They're more looking for people who have 20, 25 tortoises on their private property that they don't know about, because that could be a viable population. Yeah, it seems like otherwise they would probably just tell you to try and leave it alone. Most people will try to move them somewhere. And a lot of times the places they get moved to, like Grand Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, for example, it's a huge wildlife refuge. So people oftentimes think they can drop animals off there, and you see gopher tortoises just walking down the road there, and they have no place to build a burrow because it's the habitat there is totally unsuitable. It's way too wet. So probably what they would tell you to do, and I think it's probably a good idea, is to just leave it alone. I have talked to landowners that have had substantial numbers of burrows, and they can actually turn their land into a conservation, a mitigation bank, and they actually get tax breaks for that and credit for doing that. But again, that requires I think larger populations and a large amount of suitable habitat. But yeah, as far as just having one or two burrows, they would probably just say to just kind of let them be if possible. If not, there are places that you could take them. The only other issue with that is if the tortoises have this. It's one thing that's common with it. Well, not common, but they are known to have this respiratory disease where they have. You'll see basically fluid coming out of their nostrils, so they get this respiratory infection that's not good for them, the long-term health of them. And so potentially spreading that around to other populations could be a bad thing. So I think in general that the best thing to do would probably just be to try and leave them be, I guess. Is that at all answering your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
that answers my question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. How many do they have? You said they just had just a couple, or?
Yeah, we just had one on the property.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see that a lot of times. I mean, they're vegetarians, so they're just browsing on herbaceous plants and probably eating stuff out of your garden. I've seen a population in a cemetery, and somebody was visiting the cemetery, and every time they did so, they would leave a big pile of lettuce for the gopher tortoises. So the gopher tortoises were a little bit used to humans and just really spoiled.
Well, that's all the questions I had that I saw that you didn't answer already. So if anybody has any crazy questions that are really stuck in their head that I missed, they can go ahead and ask that now. But otherwise, I think that's all.
Hey Adam, could you tell me how to look up that mitigation stuff, or should I just email you on that?
Sorry, what was it?
For designating an area as conservation mitigation.
Yeah, I'd have to Yeah, I'd have to. I'm not off the top of my head. I'm not sure where you could find that, what the site would be, but I'll have to. I can look into that and let you know.
All right, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. Thank you to all you guys.
Yeah, and Adam,
So
I had one last question.
yeah,
So I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, but the Weeks Bay Foundation did some work with relocating some gopher tortoises to Splinter Hill Bog. They were like, it was over in Baldwin County.
yeah.
And I wish Eric was on because he like helped with this project too. But we kind of like put up this fencing so they wouldn't get out because they
Was
would like.
that right near where that was? It fairly close to where that house is back there, where
Mm-hmm.
people stand? Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you saw a bunch of burrows in that area if you've surveyed it recently.
We have not actually surveyed that area. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Is
Okay.
the fencing gone now?
Yeah, we took it down. They took it down like about a year afterwards because I was going to ask if you knew anything about like behavior wise or like the effect it has on the tortoises. Because like when you relocate something, it's always going to want like to be back where it was. So I didn't know if that was like having an
Right.
effect on the population, like maybe they're not mating or something like that.
Yeah, it's a great question because the tortoises are very social creatures, as you saw in that one video. So that one video, we have all kinds of videos of that. Like the tortoises go back and forth to different burrows. They're probably in burrows at the same time with each other. It seems like in fact, there's one paper I was reading that said that they have clicks. So I don't know if that's true or not, but they're definitely very social creatures, and so moving them around like that seemingly would have a big impact on them. But I don't know. I haven't really read anything too substantial about that. As far as that mitigation effort, I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to check out that area. I think I kind of remember where it was. So that is kind of like a hard release where you keep them enclosed for a little while, hope that they dig burrows there, and then take it down.
Yeah, and I can give you
I mean,
I can give you Jeff Davies' contact information because I know he's been surveying that area. If you wanted to add that to your list.
oh yeah, I would like to talk to him for sure. I don't think I've talked to him yet. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential habitat up there. It's getting better, especially since you guys keep burning it. So, getting rid of all of that shrub undergrowth and really opening up that understory is great for those tortoises.
Cool. Anybody else have anything?
Good.
Do the burrows keep them safe, like whenever there's fire?
Yeah. So they'll go down in there. I mean, those burrows will go down. Sometimes those burrows are 15 feet long, and they'll go down, up to 5 meters down in the soil, and so they'll certainly keep them safe. Really, the burrow is for temperature control, right? The reptiles are not good thermoregulators, so they'll when it's cold out, they'll go deep down in that burrow to kind of stay warm, and really they're doing it for the same reason when it's hot out. So when it's too hot, they'll get in that burrow where it's cooler, and so it's good. It's mostly the burrow is being used to control thermoregulation, and certainly protects them from fire when it happens, which is probably pretty important because the tortoises aren't that nimble. Although I don't know, I've seen them book it. I've seen them book it pretty fast. So maybe they could outrun a fire. I don't know.
Awesome. All right, I think that's everybody. So let's all say thanks to Adam. And is there contact information that you'd like to give out, Adam? Do you mind if I shared your email with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go for it. That'd be great. Yeah, if anyone has any questions or whatever, just send me an email.
Okay, I'll share that in the
I'd love
chat
to hear
box.
I'd love to hear from you guys.